Zabel Yessayan, writer of Resistance. Zabel Yessayan was born in 1878 in the Scudari district of Constantinople. We know about her childhood because she wrote about it in her memoir, The Gardens of Silidar. The members of my family would spend the day in the rooms toward the back of the house, where the window opened out onto a series of groves. Beyond those groves lay the Turkish neighborhoods. In those neighborhoods were magnificent mosques whose slim white minarets joined black cypress trees on the skyline. From a distance, the glistening blue Bosphorus looked like a ribbon, and the silhouette of Stamboul, shrouded in a pink mist in the morning, a golden mist during the day, and a blue mist in the evening, looked like a colorful, ever-changing, ethereal wonderland. Hearing that I hoped to become a writer, Madame Dussap tried to warn me. She said that for women, the world of literature was full of many more thorns than laurels. A woman who wanted to carve out a place for herself in society was still not tolerated. To overcome all of these obstacles, I needed to exceed mediocrity. In her words, a male writer was free to be mediocre. A female writer was not. Yessayan published her first works at the time the Hamidian massacres of 1894 to 1896 reached Constantinople, which forced Zabel to flee the city. She seized the opportunity to go to Paris to study at the Sorbonne. While there, she married the painter Dikran Yessayan and gave birth to a daughter, Sophie. At the maternity hospital, Yessayan observed the harsh conditions for poor women. She wrote her first novel, In the Waiting Room, which described the discrimination and mistreatment of Eva, a North African Jewish emigre. Yessayan returned to Constantinople as an editor of the women's pages of a journal. Along with other Armenians, she supported the overthrow of the Sultan and the reinstatement of the constitution, granting greater human rights for all, including the minorities. Less than a year after the revolution, a counter-revolution led to widespread massacres of Armenians in Adana. Yessayan joined an Armenian delegation to provide relief for the orphans. 2 years later, she published In the Ruins, her eyewitness testimony of the aftermath of the massacres, in which she gave voice to the victims, particularly the women and children. Yessayan's goal was to create an empathetic bridge between the reader and the victims. It is essential, I repeat, that all of us see our bleeding country in its true colors, that we learn to take a hard, courageous look at it. Her heartfelt impressions did not reach her intended audience. 4 years later, under the cover of World War I, the Young Turk government initiated the genocide of 3/4 of the Armenians on their ancestral homelands. On April 24, 1915, approximately 250 Armenian intellectuals were arrested and targeted for deportation and death. Zabel Yessayan was the only woman on the list. Her mother and 5-year-old son were at home when the authorities came to find her. Her mother secretly sent word to her, and Yessayan went into hiding. I had forgotten my mourning veil, and I passed through the Armenian quarters with my head held high, but all the time feeling that I was gradually fading away. Any chance encounter could deliver me to the enemy. Any corner of the street could place me face to face with informers or the police. Yessayan escaped from Constantinople to Bulgaria and then to Baku, where she transcribed the eyewitness testimony of survivors of the genocide. In 1917, she published the testimony of Haig Toroyan in Kords, an Armenian journal in Baku. He described the deportations and massacres that he had seen from Aleppo to Baghdad, all along the Euphrates River. Young women, girls, and boys were taken by force or dispersed among the Muslim population. Many of the women were sold as slaves and tattooed. In a letter from Baku, she wrote, "Whenever I am alone, which rarely happens, I isolate myself in that corner of my soul which shelters my novel's universe. In that refuge there is neither massacre, nor deportations, nor Bolsheviks, nor anything else, but only sunshine, roses, and the eternal song of love, beauty, and grace." In 1919, Yessayan delivered her letter to the head of the Armenian peace delegation in Paris about the enslavement of Armenian women and children in Muslim households, with recommendations on how to free them. Yessayan stayed in Paris after the war with her daughter and son. Her husband had passed away, and she continued to write. After visiting Soviet Armenia in the 1920s and writing her impressions in Prometheus Unbound, Yessayan decided to move to Armenia with her daughter Sophie in 1933. Her son joined them a year later. Together they lived at the house of the professors on Apovian Street. Yessayan became a bridge between Western Armenians from the former Ottoman Empire and the Eastern Armenians living in the struggling Soviet Republic. When asked how she could suffer the inconveniences of Yerevan after the comforts of Paris, she replied, "These inconveniences are meaningless in my eyes because I take an active part in building the future of our country." Does that answer your question? On June 27, 1937, Zabel Yessayan was arrested by Stalin's henchmen because she had spoken out in defense of her fellow writers. Accused of being a French spy, she was imprisoned for 5 years and then disappeared without a trace. The building where she lived at 32 Apovian Street is still there today. It's situated on a leafy street in downtown Yerevan. Most people who currently live on Apovian Street have not heard of Zabel Yessayan, or if they have heard of her, have not read her books. There's a small stone marker, which is very difficult to find. Bridging East and West, Zabel Yessayan fought for human rights, social justice, and human dignity in the Ottoman Empire and Soviet Armenia.